producer Ryan just asked me a question. He said, Chael, what is your prediction for who the next UFC heavyweight champion is going to be? And I thought this was a strange question only because I go, what do you mean? Are you asking me to pick who's going to win the fight? The trilogy fight between Stipe and Cormier? Or are you asking me, absent of those guys, who is next in line? And he responded very confusing and said, yeah. What do you mean, yeah? There's two different questions here. First off, I can tell you who the UFC champion is going to be. It's going to be either Stipe or it's going to be Cormier. But if you're asking me, Cormier leaves and he's going to retire, and eventually Stipe either retires or gets knocked off, who is the guy to knock him off? That's a little bit more confusing, particularly when you know that Verdum is coming back. Verdum is a very interesting player, and he's a spoiler to the highest of levels, and he is spoiled on two separate occasions, two separate organizations. He's spoiled the Strikeforce by upsetting Fedor. He's spoiled in the UFC upsetting Velasquez. So you have to begin to ask yourself, okay, can he get to a title shot, which largely means, by today's landscape, can he, Verdum, beat Ngannou? Well, in many ways, Verdum is the next Stipe. He largely does well what Stipe does well. He's really good on his feet. He's wild and reckless because he doesn't care if you take him down to the ground. Now, even though he does his groundwork from the bottom and Stipe does his groundwork on the top, that's a slight distinction. It is a fair distinction, but it's a slight distinction. You're still talking about a wild man on his feet who prefers to go to the ground. And by the way, will tap you out, ask Fedor and Cain Velasquez. Very interesting matchup. It's a very interesting matchup. And then when you look at the landscape, that's by today's standards. Because Rosenstrike matches up on paper very well with Ngannou. Rosenstrike could, in theory, throw Ngannou right off track if Ngannou comes out and plays the only game he knows how, which is the only game Rosenstrike wants to play. I mean, it's a little bit of a mess. I think that there is something very real to Jon Jones moving up and grabbing that division. I think that that's a lot less likely in the last 14 days when we're now equipped with what a great competitor Reyes is and how badly we want to re-see that fight. And by the way, Jan is out there. Both of which are going to be given their opportunity. All we're trying to figure out now is in which order. I don't think you can discount 205 pounds. Then you got to take into account that Glover Teixeira was just named to be fighting with Lionheart. I think that that's a very interesting matchup too. And even though that would equate to a rematch for Jon Jones, which perhaps is less likely when you're still forming that division, and we've only got three things figured out, right? Jan has separated himself. Reyes clearly got everybody's attention. Then you got the champion in Jon. You need more. Every division, you like to have 10 guys. You could rest and exhale a little bit if you had 5. Right now we have 3. So I think the Lionheart and Teixeira really does matter. But when you want to talk about who is the next best heavyweight outside of Stipe and DC, there seems to be a default to go to Ngannou. Ngannou is a great argument. I do not choose to argue against that at all. Very impressed with Ngannou. But while that argument was being made, Verdum didn't have a license. So now we have to discuss Verdum in that division, and if anybody is just going to dismiss that and tell you that's silly, then they're what's called a newbie. They're a new fan. If you've been following this sport and you dismiss Verdum, you're making an error to the highest of judgment.